Hey, tennis fans, you are listening to Match Point Canada, the official podcast of Tennis Canada. We are also members of the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. I'm Ben Lewis, joined alongside Mike McIntyre, and we are halfway through our final Grand Slam of the season, the U.S. Open from Flushing Meadows. Very happy to welcome on friend of ours and first-time guest on the podcast, staff editor for The Athletic, Lukas Weese, who was down in New York City and covering the first week of the U.S. Open. Lukas, great to have you on for the first time.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks so much, Mike. Thanks so much for having me on.
It's about time, and we're very happy to welcome this very familiar voice to us, usually at the National Bank Open. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see you this year because you were doing other things like covering the Olympics. And now here you are covering, I believe, was this your first Grand Slam that you ever covered live?
Yeah, no, it was. And it
Okay,
was
so
certainly
yeah,
very
go ahead.
memorable.
Go ahead. Tell us about the first
No.
trip to the Open.
Mhm.
What were the big highlights for you doing this for the first time live?
Yeah, it was certainly an experience, no doubt. Just being there with just so many media members and just seeing all the players, men and women in one place. Of course, you guys know when you cover the National Bank Open in one city, it's just either the men or the women, but now both the men and the women are there. And as someone who had watched the US Open growing up as a fan, just to be walking on the grounds of, a place that you've seen so many times on TV, it was awesome. And on the tennis side, just a lot of great storylines in this first week. I sort of compared it to the NCAA tournament or the March Madness, where you have these upsets in the first few days, and certainly no bigger than what you saw with Carlos Alcaraz and Novak Djokovic. And then probably the second week, we might see perhaps people go on and win who we may have thought at the start of the tournament might have gone on to win the slam. So it's going to be fascinating to see, but certainly a very memorable first week down in New York.
Yeah, as you said, certainly some fascinating storylines unfolding in the first week. Carlos Alcaraz goes out to Botic van de Zandschulp. None of us saw that coming. Our Montreal champion at the National Bank Open, Alexei Popyrin, plays an incredible match to knock off Novak Djokovic. I know those two aside, maybe just a few players that you had a chance to watch, whether it was courtside or just catching their coverage, that kind of caught your eye, and who you were impressed by, who still have a chance to go even deeper in this tournament.
Well, I'll start with Zheng Qinwen, who of course
Yeah.
won Olympic gold and made the Australian Open final. And I got to see her practice over the weekend before the tournament during Fan Week. And I was just so amazed with just her serve, just so powerful to see live in person, as well as her ground strokes as well were very effective. And you're seeing now just her breeze to the draw. I thought her getting through Amanda Anisimova, a very difficult first round opponent, was so critical for Zheng Qinwen, and now she has a rematch of Aryna Sabalenka in the quarterfinals, which I think will be a real fantastic match to see. And then I would say on the men's side, Daniil Medvedev is someone who I was really impressed with watching up close, and of course he's someone that really loves New York. Won in 2021, a past finalist for two times, and just feeling like he flew a bit under the radar. Guys entering this slam, of course, a lot of
Yeah.
the attention was on Jannik Sinner, Carlos Alcaraz, and Novak Djokovic, and now he's probably going to have to play potentially Jannik Sinner, Tommy Paul. As we're recording this, we don't know yet, but I think Medvedev is someone that could definitely surprise it and go on a bit of a run. So I'd say that those two were people that I had my eyes on that were fun to watch up close.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode of Match Point Canada. If you'd like to follow along every week, give us a like below. Hit the subscribe button as we're trying to make 15,000 subs. Yeah, and, I'm glad you mentioned Zhang. Obviously, the gold medal, as you mentioned, in Paris was massive. And that's been a bit of a theme and storyline of how much of a factor has the Olympic year or having tennis at the Olympics been on some of these players heading into the U.S. Open. Because obviously the tennis calendar is so long as it is, you add in a whole new tournament. Seems to have maybe impacted some of the men's results, but some of the women and medalists still going strong.
Definitely. And it's a bit of a crapshoot, right? Like obviously it has an impact more the transition going from clay to hard court. And most of these players are used to just going from the grass court to the hard court. But I really like what Francis Tiafoe said. He just said, look, that's what losers say in hindsight, right? After they lose, is sort of blame the transition. Everyone has to deal with it. Everyone's, tired at this point, going through some, potentially nagging injuries, feeling fatigued. It's just a matter of figuring out how to endure that in order to advance. And for someone like Francis Tiafoe right now, he certainly was one who skipped the Olympics, and that certainly paid off for him as he's now in the quarterfinals. But it's certainly having an impact, and it'll be interesting to see how these players who definitely were in the Olympics continue to perform.
I love how you describe New York and just the tournament there and how it's next level, having the men and the women going simultaneously. I felt my first time there at the US Open was just like overload. Like, where do I go? What matches do I see? What's the fastest way to get from one to the other? And how do I make these decisions? Um, how did you find it in that sense when you were planning out your day, just the strategy that you employed as you covered a tournament that big? And maybe who were a couple of players that surprised you that maybe you didn't know as well beforehand that kind of impressed you, whether it was on court or just even impressed with the way they handled questions?
Yeah, like I think the approach is sort of, you have a plan going in. Obviously, you want to see some of the bigger names, how they do. Someone like, Iga Swiatek or Coco Gauff or Carlos Alcaraz, Jannik Sinner. But often, Mike, the plans that you have going in often get ripped up, right? You're ultimately tracking, okay, what's going on here at this court, and maybe there's a 5-set match going here on another court. So it's about being nimble. It's about sort of being flexible in terms of the coverage, in terms of how you approach those things. I was really impressed in terms of someone like just very friendly, impressed with someone, Tommy Paul. I thought Tommy was someone who, came in and, had just, a real cool energy about him. He of course is in the quarterfinals now. And I mentioned Francis Tiafoe earlier, like, just seeing that smile and that energy, in person, it's as infectious on the screen as it is, seeing him up close, chatting with him in person. And I think what's great about the US Open too, just how the media is set up, is you're just interacting with players constantly. Like, players are just walking around, coaches are walking around. So you get that chance to, maybe, pull a coach aside and have a conversation to see, how they're doing and how a certain matchup looks. So there's just a lot of opportunities to tell really cool stories. And that's what makes these Grand Slams so special from our side of the thing.
Well, I was really happy to hear that you were going to be going down there and enjoying it like Ben and I couldn't this year. So if we can't be there, at least a friend of ours getting to go is cool. And, I've always been impressed with how you cover a tournament and seeing you in action at the National Bank Open. Like, I'm sort of like you in the same way that I like to cover a lot of ground. I like to be out there, see as many matches, practice courts as I can, really feel the whole tournament. And everywhere I go at the National Bank Open, I often look around and I'm like, oh, there's Lucas. Oh, there's Lucas. And I feel like we're cut from the same cloth in that rapport and respect. And, speaking of Canadians and what happened with them, obviously not what we were hoping for in singles, with most of them going out early. Thank goodness for Gabriel Diallo, who Ben and I are going to get into a little bit later as well on the pod. But what positives do you take from what you saw from our Canadians in New York, either in victory or in defeat?
Yeah, like I'll just touch quickly on Gabe Diallo. Like, it was just so cool because I was there on court 17 watching him when he beat Arthur Fee, and that was just such an entertaining atmosphere. That court, for those listeners who ever get down to the US Open, I really recommend court 17. It's one of the best outer courts there on the grounds. And it was just such an electric atmosphere because you had a lot of French fans saying Allez Arthur. And then you had, of course, some Gabe fans as well. And just seeing Diallo up close just has a really big game. Like, his ground strokes are just so massive and just so much power and just his ability just to stay composed, because there were so many moments both in that match against our tour and then of course even in defeat against Tommy Paul, where he could have really folded, and I just felt like he was just so resilient. And that's just the theme, I think, for these Canadians is even though most of them did lose, on that first day, I just think that there's, the attitude is, we're just going to keep going, right? It's tennis and it's been a long season. And at the end of the day, you just have to just keep powering through and try to find the next thing, and it's tough. Like I talked with Felix Auger-Aliassime after his defeat, and he was just so raw. He just said everything went wrong in his loss to Jakob Mensik. So it's going to take some soul searching, I feel like, for the Canadians, but I feel like they're, definitely a resilient bunch, and hopefully that more better results are on the horizon for the Canadians.
Yeah, I think resilience is such a key makeup at this stage of the season for this tournament, the U.S. Open, and just finding ways to survive the first week. And as we mentioned, Carlos Alcaraz, Novak Djokovic were unable to do that. The world number one, Jannik Sinner, I mean, there was so much swirling around him going into this tournament between the two failed doping tests from previously in the season. He won off appeal, didn't miss any time or action, but was dealing with difficult questions in press, getting some challenging press. How impressed have you been with what Jannik has managed to do in terms of just keeping his composure on the court and obviously getting himself into the second week of the tournament?
Yeah, very impressed. I mean, that was the story heading into the tournament. It certainly was the news around Sinner and the anti-doping sanction. And I just felt like he handled certainly that pre-tournament press conference. He answered all the tough questions and just was very composed. And there were some attempts to try to restrict that, but he just kept answering, and I thought did a really good job there. And I felt with Jannik, he had that tough first match against Mackie McDonald, but once he passed through that, he's starting to find that form. And now with Djokovic and Alcaraz out, he's the prohibitive favorite, guys, to win on the men's side. Like it would be a shock to me if he doesn't lift the trophy on Sunday, capping off what's been a really huge season that I still say got started at the National Bank Open when he won in his first ATP Masters 1000 in Toronto last year. So I just think Sinner's getting better. He just hits the ball so flat. And if you guys, if you have listeners who haven't seen Sinner in person, do yourself a favor and do that, because his ground strokes in person are just something else. So definitely Sinner, someone I've been very impressed with, and hopefully he continues and progresses well here in the second week.
Yeah, very well said. I don't know if you had already maybe left New York at the point that Coco Gauff exited this tournament, but I just wanted to get your thoughts. If you sensed maybe any vulnerability from the defending champion ahead of that match with Emma Navarro, obviously you felt like she was maybe playing okay because she'd got herself in a position to make a quarterfinal, but things did not go her way against Emma in that match.
Yeah, my sort of hint was after one of her early wins. I believe it was after her second round win. She went right out to the practice courts to practice her serve. And look, it happens in tennis, sometimes in golf. A golfer has his round and then goes out and practices. But it just felt like, guys, that the serve was going to be her Achilles heel in the end. She mentioned that during press, and it certainly was, right? 19 double faults. It's hard to win many matches with that. And it was honestly at some points just tough to watch, right? This is someone that you guys know Coco. Coco's someone that just battles and competes. And when you just don't have that stroke, it could be a real struggle. So Emma Navarro has been a tough matchup for Coco. She's just so solid and so steady. And that proved once again in the fourth round at the U.S. Open.
I had some concerns about Coco coming in, just in terms of even in Toronto, the way she was talking about being tired, about it being a long season. But I really was kind of impressed with her comments after the loss. And the word she used was perspective. And she's been able to put it in perspective that, hey, she got to be the flag bearer along with LeBron James for Team USA at the Olympics. And she's still having a great career, and she's a top 5 player, and, all these kind of things. Do you feel like, because we have seen some younger players sort of feel that burnout. We've seen it with Bianca, who needed to take some time away from the sport. Amanda Anisimova was talking very candidly in Toronto about the benefits of taking some of last year away for herself as well. Do you think Coco is sort of wired in a way and has the right people around her to, keep that perspective moving forward, despite the fact you're not always going to be able to live up to not only your expectations, but other people's as well?
Well, that's the big question, right? You hope so, because having the right people around you, it's so critical to a young player's success. And I think it was very interesting that one of the last questions that was asked after losing to Emma Navarro was, are you going to, ask, maybe a serve tactician to come in and try to, work on your serve? And Coco said, look, I'm going to looking at all options here to try and improve my game. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of that in the months ahead. But a lot of the players, Mike, have just spoken about the tennis schedule and it being such a grind, and it's really challenging. And I think if you look at a player like Jessica Pegula, who took some, didn't play the clay court season, it really helped her, right? And now she's in the quarterfinals, has had a great hard court season. So all these players are managing it differently, but you're absolutely right that you got to surround yourself with the right people at a young age. And remember, Coco Gauff's only 20 years old. It feels like she's been around forever, but she's still so young and has such a bright future ahead.
Yeah, I'm in my 40s and I drop 19 double faults all the time. So, maybe I should look for a serve tactician. I don't know, Ben, maybe you want to help me out with that. But I think I'm beyond.
Yeah, it depends what you're paying.
I'm beyond hope, and that's my perspective. Lucas, you mentioned that the tennis season is so long, and certainly it is. It's basically like 11 and a half months of the year. Beyond the US Open, what interests you in what's remaining this year on the tennis calendar, and what would be the next big tournament that you'd like to go cover down the road?
Oh, I mean, for me, I would say you obviously got, Labor Cup's always an interesting one. Who's going to be there? Carlos Alcaraz has committed to playing, so hopefully we see him play in that tournament. To me, the Asian swing is going to be fascinating because, of course, a lot of players were talking about that at the U.S. Open as a chance to get more ranking points, right? Because now you're trying to get seeded for the Australian Open in January. And I would say in terms of next event to cover in tennis, probably Wimbledon. I would say it's the Masters, right, of tennis. It has just so much history and tradition, and it's definitely a place that feels like for any tennis fan, a place that you would want to cover, and yeah, so I would say Wimbledon definitely on the bucket list.
Same here.
I want to ask, as we wrap up, what was your favorite match that you were able to take in this past week of Flushing Meadows?
Yeah, I'd have to say the Shelton Tiafoe five setter. That was just such a battle between those guys. A great atmosphere in Arthur Ashe, and it really felt like it could go either way. There were so many really cool points between the guys, but I was really impressed with Tiafoe to be able to pull that out after losing to Shelton last year at the U.S. Open, and just a great moment at the net between those guys. Two friends that are obviously competitors, but so much respect for one another, and just so much respect for both those guys. So that was a lot of fun to see, just an all-American matchup on Arthur Ashe. You can't beat it at the U.S. Open.
Absolutely. Well, Lucas, look, we hope this is the first of many U.S. Opens for you, and hopefully we'll be there alongside you down the road as well. Thanks so much for taking the time. I know you just got back recently, so thanks for taking some moments aside to recap everything for us. It's been great to have you on for the first time, and it certainly won't be the last.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
There he goes, Lukas Weese, staff editor for The Athletic. And speaking of extraordinary, I mean, we touched on a little bit Novak Djokovic and Carlos Alcaraz both being out of this tournament, but it is still like a shock. And the biggest shock to this really is with Djokovic out of this tournament and knowing he won't have a major this season. First time since 2002, no member of the big three will win a Grand Slam. I mean, I don't want to say it's the end of an era, but that's an extraordinary stretch of 22 years.
Well, and after all that time of pure dominance from those three collectively, finally we get something new and fresh. And look, I enjoyed that time period, and we'll probably never see that kind of dominance by three tennis players ever again, the way that they just basically shut everybody else out for that period of time. But this is it. I mean, anyone who's been complaining about the predictability on the men's tour for the last 2 decades, well, here you go. Here's your moment where we're getting something fresh happening. And, Daniil Medvedev is the only remaining previous champion in New York from 2021. And I like how Lucas said sort of at the beginning that we've kind of quietly forgotten about, like, how do you forget about a guy like Medvedev who is so good on hard courts? But I think it just speaks to the way that Sinner and Alcaraz have really separated themselves from the pack. And then Djokovic clearly having a strong summer, making the finals of Wimbledon and winning the gold medal at the Olympics. And, for Alcaraz, he seemed like he was able to shake it off fairly quickly. And why not? You've already won 2 slams and you got a silver medal this summer. And, you've got tons of years ahead of you. And for Djokovic, I mean, obviously he would have loved to have gotten slam number 25, but that gold medal and how much he had to put in just emotionally, right, and physically to make that happen. I don't think for 1 second he's going to regret a single thing from this entire year when he looks at that gold medal sitting at home.
Yeah, and look at the reality of both of these two entering into the U.S. Open at Flushing Meadows. I know Francis Tiafoe is, yeah, you make excuses in hindsight, but of course the reality is Novak Djokovic not getting a single hard court lead up event is costly, and having another surface change again at the age of 37 makes a bit of a difference. Carlos Alcaraz, the amount of tennis he played, and then the flop in Cincinnati, losing to Gabriel Monfils. I mean, he was obviously uh, coming in, I think, in danger, especially in that first week if he wasn't going to find his game. And all due credit to both Botic van de Zandschulp for playing a fabulous match against Carlos and never let him find any rhythm and form whatsoever. And Alexei Popyrin, who, proved that title in Montreal at the National Bank Open was no fluke. And this guy is now a top 30 player, has such an explosive game with that forehand and that serve. He's out of the tournament, but there's some really interesting names still in this tournament who I think we've been hungry to see deep runs from. Jack Draper of Britain into the quarterfinals. Alex de Minaur coming off an injury at Wimbledon's playing great again. Look at Grigor Dimitrov still going and gets a huge victory over Andrei Rublev. So there's some really interesting storylines from some great names and great players. I'd love to see, if it's not winning a title, maybe making a first-time semifinal or even finding themselves in a final.
Absolutely. I mean, someone's going to be in the final, not necessarily someone who hasn't been there before, but someone that we haven't seen there in a while. I mean, Zverev's made a US Open final, but that was
Yes.
4 years ago and under unusual circumstances with the the pandemic going on when there were no fans in New York. I love seeing Tiafoe going deep. I just love that guy. He's just so great for the sport, what he brings, and such a great ambassador. And look, if we can't have a Canadian win the US Open in singles, I'm happy to see an American do it, and we haven't seen an American man do it since Andy Roddick, which was already, 21 years ago, if you can believe that. So, yeah, definitely backing some of these guys to take advantage of this opportunity. And even though maybe people now think, oh, it's Sinner's tournament to lose, I don't know quite if I buy that with the time that he's taken off and all that he's been through mentally as well. I think if him and Medvedev end up going head to head, that'll be an interesting one because they've faced each other something like 12 times before, with Medvedev winning like the first seven and then Sinner winning, I think, the last
Yeah, 5 of the next 6 or
five or
something. Yeah.
so. And
Yeah.
so that could be an interesting dynamic too. But yeah, it's just nice to be talking. I think from our perspective too, it's nice to be talking about some fresh stuff at a slam. Throughout this season, really, with faces winning and making it deep that we haven't seen there before.
Yeah, and look, Daniil Medvedev for me, he's been a victim of that kind of top form, really getting shut out with very difficult draws at slams. Happened at Wimbledon, where he had a huge win over Jannik Sinner and then gets Alcaraz in waiting. Happened at the US Open last year, if we remember. He had that huge win over Carlos Alcaraz in the semis, Novak Djokovic waiting in the final. So in this case, he's not going to have to slay two absolute beasts in a row. So definitely, if that quarterfinal is to happen with Jannik Sinner, very, very interesting match on that side. If we talk a little women's tennis, I mean a little bit more on Coco Gauff losing to Emma Navarro. Should plug this that I had the chance to speak with Emma Navarro for one of our National Bank Open episodes from that week. So get a chance, if you haven't, to have a listen to that conversation and episode. Emma Navarro has been playing some fantastic tennis, no doubt. And you look at the progression of her season, getting steadily better and better and inside the top 15 and, semifinals in Toronto, improving regularly. Coco Gauff, though, there was the serve we talked about with Lukas. It's just not a winning recipe, especially at this stage of a tournament, 19 double faults. And now the questions are really surrounding her coach, Brad Gilbert, who is taking a lot of heat for this one. Do you think maybe he's going to be taking or deserving some of this blame for Coco's struggles, in particular on the hard courts here?
Yeah, so tell me first of all, like, why would that fall on Brad Gilbert? Like, look, we know Coco Gauff has the technical capabilities to have a fantastic serve. It's obviously she's going through a patch, and your coach can't go out there with you when that's happening and sort of fix those moments, which are mostly mental when that's happening. I know, not to compare myself to the pros, but when my serve falls apart, I step up to the line and I'm feeling so much weight on my shoulders. I'm overthinking it. I'm in my own head. I throw the ball up in the air and already I'm feeling that like anxiety in my chest. And if you're double faulting 19 times, I'm assuming you're going through something similar when you're stepping up to the line. So how much can a coach like Brad Gilbert help in those moments? I almost wonder if she needs to speak with someone for more of like a mental
Mental
coach to
side.
help, work through those, anxious moments, maybe.
Yeah, I think a lot of this conversation started with the fact that so Brad Gilbert, after this loss that Coco Gauff takes, he goes back in to do ESPN commentary, and he's on the panel with Renee Stubbs there, and Renee just ripping into the performance from Coco and suggesting that she sees bad technique on her second serve, that the elbow's dropping too low and she's not brushing the ball properly and consistently. And so after that happened, and Brad Gilbert is kind of deer in the headlights because he's a little bit stuck and conflicted. Like, how much can he criticize his player right now on the ESPN panel, and how much can he defend himself? I sort of had the thought from listening back and watching that really Gilbert should not be on a panel discussing his own player after her loss.
Well, look, it's super interesting because as a tennis fan, I think you love to see that. Like, oh my God,
That's fair.
I get to see the player's coach right away. And kudos to Renee Stubbs for kind of putting him on the hot seat. And I think too often when we see tennis analysts working together, it's too nice, it's too buddy buddy,
True.
and they're all part of a nice team, which is great. I mean, it's great that they're being cordial and collegial and all that, but I think it's great that she asked a tough question. And if you're going to go on there, I think you should be ready for those tough questions. And I think tennis fans love to see that. Now, being that you and me are on the media side, I do think there's a certain element where it's kind of awkward to see these coaches slash analysts weaving in and out of both roles simultaneously during a tournament, like Brad Gilbert, like Darren Cahill, like Pam Shriver. And how do
Mm-hmm.
you turn that on and off? And it just seems a little bit odd to me. But at the end of the day, I try and think from a tennis fan's perspective. I'd love to see it, and I'd love to see more tough questions like that too.
Yeah, no, it's certainly made for interesting television, and now it's being pretty heavily debated. We'll see. I think Coco still bounces back from this, no doubt, and huge result for Emma Navarro, first time quarterfinalist at the
And
U.S. Open. Go
and
ahead.
Navarro, I just want to say before we move along here, really kind of inspiring to other players. Like she'd never won a match before this year at the US Open.
Yeah,
She'd never made it, I don't think, to the second week of a major. And look at all that she's done this week. She's ranked inside the top 15 this year. She's ranked inside the top 15. She's playing some terrific, consistent tennis. She's 23 years old. She's really made a name for herself. And I think you look at other young players and like, Bianca, Layla, Felix, if we just look at our Canadians, there's no reason to say that you can't click it into another level, even if you've had a year or two of disappointing results at the slams.
yeah, well said. Zheng, who we discussed with Lucas, played with Donna Vekic until past 2 a.m., winning a great three-set thriller rematch of the gold medal match in Paris. I mean, do we have to bring up the conversation again of these incredibly late nights at slams? It seems like it happens every single year. I don't know, every single slam. We had this at the Australian Open, Medvedev playing till 4 a.m. How do we fix this?
I know. I thought we were safe in New York, like Eastern time zone finally. And then here I
Yeah.
am last night. It's almost 2 in the morning. And what am I doing? I'm still watching tennis and I just can't step away from it because the match was really compelling. And yeah, it's hard to sort of predict how things are going to go if you're going to get some men's matches that go 3.5, almost 4 hours if they go 5 sets. Maybe, best to move some of those matches afterwards to, other courts and get them started earlier. Um, yeah, I mean, there's every kind of take you can deliver on this one, but I think it's cool for the hardcore tennis fans that want to slug it out. I just want to say, like, respect if you're staying live and you're watching it till 2 in the morning, and respect if you're staying up at home and still somehow going to work the next day too.
Yeah, no kidding. Number one, before we just wrap with the Canadian results, the number one and the number two to me on the women's side are still the favorites here. And Aryna Sabalenka has been rock solid through the first week. It's almost a shame that she has to meet Zhang right now in the quarterfinals. If that feels like semifinal quality match, but I think Aryna, the way she dispatched her in the Australian Open final, she has to be the favorite there. And then Iga Swiatek, as we record this, comfortably defeating Ludmila Samsonova in straight sets to enter the quarterfinals. I don't know if we were overlooking Iga, but she's looking perfectly great on these hard courts.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see Jessica Pegula go up against her because,
Yeah.
Pegula hasn't made it past the quarters in a major, and maybe she won't be able to here either, but she's really established herself as a top level player, a very good player. But I think if she gets to the semis at the US Open and gets past Iga, then she starts moving into that great player sort of,
Definitely.
category, and maybe something that can sustain her moving forward. But let's look towards the Canadians just briefly here as we wrap things up. We've already mentioned it was disappointing to see them go out so early. Gabriel Diallo absolutely shining through for Canadians in singles, and the 140 grand US that he's going to pocket for that is going to go so far in terms of his continued development, training, coaching, tournaments he can afford to go to now or stay a little bit more comfortably at. So very happy for him. And Gabby Dabrowski still alive and well, and she's her and Aaron Routliffe are the only potential defending champions who will repeat this year, because through singles and mixed doubles and men's doubles, all the champs from a year ago have lost. So hopefully Gabby and Aaron keep it going. They're in the quarterfinals on Tuesday.
Yeah, and amazing result for Gabriel Diallo. I liked his first round match against John Munar. I thought he had a great chance to get his first win in a major. And then you're thinking after that, okay, he's playing a top 25 guy in Arthur Fils. It's going to stop here, right? And wow, did he put together an incredible second round performance. The serve is so spot on and huge. As Lucas mentioned, massive ground strokes. And he showed himself incredibly well against Tommy Paul. Pushed that match to 4 sets. So that was a big time result. I think he's going to be in the top 100 very soon. Just
and
quickly,
I wonder how at Davis Cup, how he's going to fit into the mix at Davis Cup. He's playing so
yeah,
well right now. He's got the most momentum of any of the Canadian men coming in. I mean,
I'd play him over
Vasek,
Dennis.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
and Vasek has been, dealing with some, injury issues again recently. I hope he's feeling better for that.
Hmm.
I tell you, I spoke with Milos Raonic yesterday, and unfortunately, he's sustained a broken toe when he stubbed it against his bed frame. So just
Oh,
bad luck
goodness.
for Milos.
Yeah.
Not sure when we'll see him again, but it doesn't sound like he'll be possible for Davis Cup. So suddenly, maybe Gabriel Diallo is going to play a bigger role than expected. And look, he's answered the bell for Canada quite a few times the last couple of years.
Yeah, yeah, and I believe he's capable, and he has wins over top 30 players. Just quickly, Denis Shapovalov lost to Botic van Zandschulp, who I mean had the incredible win over Alcaraz. We'll see if Denis can get it going maybe in the indoor hardcourt season. That's my big hope for Felix to turn this season around, which has been good in spots, bad outdoor hardcourt season, but he tends to make his hay on the indoor hard surface.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it. What was it last year? No, I think it was the year before where he won those, was it
Three
three
in a row.
tournaments and then made
Yep.
it deep at the Paris indoors as well. So hopefully something like that can help him out. And he doesn't have that many points to defend, of course, this year. So hopefully something that can sustain him inside the top 20. I mean, it's been said before by many, but I still wonder for him. And you could apply this maybe to some other Canadians as well. If, coaching change, is that something that gets mentioned or talked about? Is that something that he and maybe a couple of the others would consider? I know Bianca's recently just working with her coach JT, so I'm not sort of suggesting in that sense. I think they need to let that play out a little bit longer. But in some other instances, maybe it's time for a new voice at least to sort of come in and assist with the development there.
Yeah, or even an additional voice. We'll see how it transpires. We'll see how the final week of the U.S. Open unfolds. Guys, thanks so much for listening to Matchboard Canada. We will talk to you next time.